Hi, this is Scott Garibay, and I wanted to talk about Dungeons and Dragons, and I wanted to talk about an absolutely fascinating occurrence. So, this 2023 year has been truly incredible. What I want to talk about is OSR and indie content creators on YouTube, commentators on YouTube, dogpiling on Dungeons and Dragons D&D channel release and celebrating just the rough edges of the channel's release, right? Like of its launch. And I want to talk about just how ridiculous it looks on the OSR and the indie side, because it's really fascinating just to see how this actually full rolls out. So let's get all the way there. Let's talk this through. So it is really fascinating. So D&D just launched its own channel, and it's gonna be like multiple like new shows, new content every single week. One of its distribution points is Amazon Freevee. I actually think it has multiple distribution points. Very fascinating, right? And so D&D did a thing, and I think that's one of the things we saw in 2023 is Dungeons and Dragons does a thing. The OSR and the indie come in and they're like, "Oh, you screwed the whole thing up, Dungeons and Dragons. You guys are such fools. If only you could do things the way the OSR and the indies do it, then you could have 10% of your money and 10% of the people who are engaged with your game. Why don't you do it that way?" Right? Like it's just a constant drumbeat. Now, I think the person at the lead of this OSR indie charge against D&D right now is a professor, ironically, Professor Dungeon Master, who has a famous YouTube name now that he wants to desperately shed that he can't, right? Because like he's like, ugh, I built so much under this, and like that's why I say at the beginning of every single video, this is Scott Garibay. It's me, right? Like and I own what I say, and it's tough because it's challenging, right? But own what you say. It's an important part of doing this, right? So, and if you don't, you end up doing videos like Professor Dungeon Master, where you're literally you think this is a joke, but he literally has videos where he's talking to himself. It's astounding. Yeah, it's really fascinating. So basically, so D&D launches their channel, right? And so Professor Dungeon Master immediately goes, "Oh, it's a dumpster fire." And then I see another, OSR indie commentator going, "Oh, it's a dumpster fire." Oh, and they're saying, "Oh, there was mistakes made and D&D did it," and I didn't watch the videos. I just looked at the thumbnails, right? Because it's scandal of the week, right? And there's this conga line on YouTube of people like D&D did bad, like they did a thing and now we need to rant about it, and it's absolutely constant. What I think is really interesting is, and I want to set the record straight because who else is here to do it, right? So what's really fascinating to me is they're like, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons, you launched your own channel and it didn't go perfectly, right?" What astounds me is what is really being said is, "Oh, Dungeons and Dragons, you put on your boots this morning, and look at that, your socks don't match, and you used the rabbit loop rather than the double back loop. You fools! Your socks should match, and you should have used the double back loop. Do you guys know anything?" And D&D is like, "You guys are barefoot." And that's the issue. It's like these OSR and indie commentators are like, "You guys didn't launch your Dungeons and Dragons persistent content channel correctly," right? And then my comeback is like, "You guys don't have a channel. Like Dungeons and Dragons is one game, right? Is Dungeons and Dragons is one tabletop role playing experience, right? It's one product, right? And your entire industry with with over 1,000 games between OSR and indie that are even known to the public, right? Have never done this once, right? You're like, "Oh, your socks don't match and you didn't do the loop right." You guys haven't done it at all. You're barefoot. OSR and indie is literally barefoot. This is another case of Dungeons and Dragons doing something that the OSR and the indie creators can't even spell, right? And that's my issue is like, before you critique, are you allowed to critique a thing you've never done in your entire industry, let alone on your specific single game, right? And that's my point is Dungeons and Dragons is is doing so much. And people are like, "Oh, you did it wrong." You can't say you did it wrong if you've never done it, right? Dungeons and Dragons released its second blockbuster before the OSR or the Indies even did anything. Did a movie even people even remember? This is OSR and Indie. You guys don't have a right to criticize and say do better on something you've literally never done. Every single word of that is my humble opinion. What's important is when I get to hear your humble opinion. When you get in the comments and send your traffic, please consider liking, subscribing, and have a wonderful millennium.